Hi, Kevin Keller, field agronomist with Pioneer out of South Central Nebraska. I'm here with Cody Robinson. He's associated with Planter Works out of South Central Nebraska here by Wilcox. And just wanted to go through some of the planter setups for this spring, some of the things to really hone in on, some things to pay attention to on maintenance, but also some things to pay attention to on setup as we get actually into the field. So looking at this, I guess big picture, Cody, we can get into the individual components, but starting off with maybe just the frame setup and leveling and weights, what are some things that we ought to look at?
So one of the first things I do when I get to a planter to set it is make sure the bar is running level throughout the field. And with that, a lot of times maybe slightly tip back. So one of the first things that starts everything on the planter is having a level toolbar. The next thing we want to look at is make sure out here on our wings, if we don't have a weight transfer system or anything like that, we get into a drier spring, tougher soils, higher speeds, all these things change it. To make sure those row units are getting in the ground and those wings are getting in the ground, we got to have adequate weight out on the end. And that's going to change throughout our soil conditions, our tillage practices. So just make sure year to year you're checking out those things. If we need to add more weight, our wings are fully getting in the ground and everything's working in unison.
Okay, so when you talked about your level on the toolbar, you're going in the field and then you just stop to check that, or what's the best way to check if you're level?
My favorite way to check level is with a four-wheeler, ATV, or pickup. While the planter is going the speed you're going to plant. So if you're going to plant 5 mile an hour, check it at 5 mile an hour. If you're going to plant 10 mile an hour, check it at 10 mile an hour. So we've gotten to the point where we take a four-wheeler, pickup, whatever with us and ride alongside the planter or ride on the planter itself. Make sure you're safe doing that, but you can tell a lot from a planter. One really cool thing I've seen, and I hope to maybe get into this more as I try to get a thermal camera for hunting. I thought about running around to some planters, finding wear points with a thermal camera.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So you could find hot spots throughout the planter, bearing wear, all sorts of different things. So
That'd come in really handy for harvest too. And then you talked about, okay, so if you're going to run it any one way on that bubble, being level, being tilted forward versus being tilted back, being a little bit better tilted back, is that to make sure that we still have adequate closing, or what's the idea there?
yeah, adequate closing and that bar slightly tilted back, that bar kind of putting some momentum back on them row units, keeping them in the ground, and then above all that, keeping those parallel arms parallel, maybe slightly uphill. It's hard to keep them perfect. I think maybe some guys they want to make them perfectly parallel. It's not going to be always perfectly parallel, but as long as they're very close to that.
Okay, and then going to the weights. So obviously, if a guy's got one of your precision planting setups with weigh bars on every row unit, they can tell immediately on their ground contact if they got enough weight. But let's say a guy doesn't. What's the best way to tell if you're maintaining ground contact? Is there a good way to be able to really gauge that, or what's a tip there?
If I have a planter that I'm going in without weigh bars or anything on that, I always like to dig all 16 rows, and I want to dig those 16 rows or make sure we check these outside rows above all at planting what the same speed you're going to plant at, because your downforce is going to change throughout the field. So if you want to go to your planting speed and then make darn sure we're getting true 2-inch depth out here on these rows on the ends is probably the best way. And then you can check some gauge wheels, do some other things, but I've gotten to the point where I've been around so many planters with where we have the ability of knowing what our ground contact is. It's just so important to, if you're able to get that's very important.
Yep. So if you have the weigh bars, try to run 100% ground contact pretty much all the time. Take it off of that to make sure you're on that bubble. Yep.
We used to really try for 100. If we got good ride and 98, our good ride is decent, above 90, and we got 98% ground contact. We're not creating any other problems out there. That's a good place to be. Don't stress yourself out about being 100%, especially in a rougher field or a higher speed. So keeping that 98, 95 ground contact is kind of where we want to be.
Okay. And then also too, so we're talking about just the planter setup before we get into some of those wear points. Going back to that depth and ground contact, one thing that I've seen a lot more people try to pay more attention to lately is zeroing out a planter. So what does that look like, and how do you roughly go about doing that?
So zeroing out a planter, all these row units are going to wear differently, and all these components on each row unit is going to wear differently. So what we're going to do, they have jigs out there. I wish I had one with me today. But really what it is you're setting your true V's flat on the ground, and then we got 2-inch. Those gauge wheels are going to be up 2 inches on every row. And then you're going to go back and look at your depth control and make sure every row is the same. So when it used to be go out, set a planter, oh, we're going to set it at 4 and 4 on the depth handles, 4 and 4. Every row the same. Well, this row might be 1.5 inches. That row might be 2.5 inches because they're all going to wear differently.
Yep.
So the main thing on zeroing out a planter is to get every single row at actually 2 inches. And the only way we can do that is check each row individually.
Yeah, might be a good indicator of wear too. If something is an inch off, you know, a lot of times if we're trying to find a quarter of an inch, that would be one slot. But yeah, if you're at way out of tolerance, so to speak, then it might be something additional to look at. So, anything else on the frame or main bar setup that you think you'd want to mention that we ought to look at?
You know, it's kind of obvious, but just cracks and different things throughout your frame, checking out those things, I think sometimes those get overlooked. We think everything's fine from year to year, but finding those problems now versus when you're in the field, as things get older and fatigue, it's kind of obvious, but I would definitely take the time to do it.
Yep. Go through it, fine-tooth comb, and look some of those components over. So going from the frame to some of the wear points, let's dig into a row unit. You got one tore apart down here,
Yes.
So let's take a look at that.
Digging into a row unit here, obviously the first thing we're going to do is check all the bearings within this row unit. Okay. So starting up front with our row cleaners, make sure our row cleaners are good to go. If you got still a hydraulic drive, this planter here is going from hydraulic drive to electric drive. But if you're still running hydraulic drive, all those little bearings throughout the planter, any little chain or bearing problem without the C drive is going to throw your C drive off. So any little part that you find there is just going to make your planting that much smoother. So checking all those things out. As we move back on the row unit here, we'll take a look at the True V's. So True V's probably don't need to be replaced every year, but I'm a firm believer in all of them should be taken off every year, checked every year, all the bearings checked. On most of your John Deere or all your John Deere planters, your True V's are going to be 15 inches brand new. These particular True V's here got some little bit of wear on them, but they're just a little under 15 inches, 15 3/4, and 14.5 is our cutoff on a 15-inch True V. So when it's wearing a 1/2 inch, so guys will say, well, I'm getting close to that 14.5. What do you think I should do? Well, you have 900 acres of corn to plant, 3,000. Kind of just figure out what your year looks like and make that decision from there. But as we're planting a crop of corn that's worth more than $1,000 an acre, to try and skimp on just a small True V item, $100 a row on a 12 row planter, is kind of a small expense in my opinion. As we all know, if we don't have a good stand, we whatever we throw at it later on is not going to make much of a difference. So True V's we can't stress enough.
Yeah, it's simple math. You know, I'm just thinking, you know, if you have 1,000 acres of corn for easy figuring, and it's 2 bushels that a couple of these things add up to, that's 2 times 1,000, 2,000 times, let's say even $4.50 corn starts adding up pretty quick to where maybe $9,000-10,000 in the planter is easily worth it at that point. Just on a minor scale, you know, and obviously 2 bushels is nothing. It can be just a component of a little bit of wear here and there. Also, too, your bevel, right? The other thing, too, is I know a lot of guys have gotten into how true these really are, maybe even out of the box sometimes as far as being warped. Would you just simply, if they're on the planter, just kind of spin them and check them? If they're out of the box, is there something you kind of look at to make sure that they're at least within a decent tolerance?
So you can set yourself up a little axle, I guess, in the vise, and check spin off of a bench setup. I think they need to be close. Some of these high yielding guys, they do that. They get into, you know, really tight clearances. Sometimes that can be really frustrating. I think checking them, making sure they're not extremely bad is a good idea, but we don't want to maybe stress completely on that.
And at least on a deer, you want a contact point of what, about a couple inches down on the bottom. If you're going to use like a business card, they always talk about shimming them with a card and checking them.
We're taking 2 business cards down there in the front of the True V where the contact point is.
So pretend this is a business card.
We want about 1.75 inches of contact to 2 inches, but we want it consistent across the planter.
So slide this down the back if it's on the planter, and slide it down the front and mark it in both places.
Mark it in both places, leave your cards in there, and then it's also a good idea to check every single one. Some guys will check one row even on a new planter, and then they'll shim the whole planter the same. Well, we all know, like Kevin said, each True V is a little bit different. So you want to check every single row, make sure they're all shimmed exactly the same.
Okay. So then as far as bushings go, there's a lot of wear in places where we can get slop in these planters. You got the parallel arms up front. Maybe that's a good place to start. Go from front to back on here. So
the parallel arms, I mean, one little test the guy can do is just check and see how much wear you got. These are pretty tight here. With the planter up, measure how much travel you have in them parallel arms just in wear. So if you have a 1/2 inch of travel in those parallel arms, measure down at the frog with the True V's off, that means your seed depth's varying 1/2 inch throughout the field. What we went to now here at Planter Works, and there's some others out in the area, but we went with Precision Duraware arms, and what it is a hardened bushing inside this arm, and then you put a soft bushing within there, so you're always wearing out that soft bushing. When you go to replace these, all you replace that soft bushing because this arm's not wearing out. In the old days, that arm would wear out, the bushing would not, so then we'd have to replace the whole arm.
Yep.
And then with these, they're machined tight. You might look at a brand new planter sometime without these on it, and you got slop in your parallel arms. So these, not only do they make the planter row unit, your depth more true, they take some chatter out of the row unit, and that's going to help with your singulation and your spacing of your seed. So parallel arms get overlooked. If they got a little wear on them, I think a lot of guys will think, oh, that's not that big a deal, but it can turn into a huge deal. You go to a setup like this, it makes 1, it improves your planter. 2, it improves the next time to overhaul it. These are going to last you a really long time.
I agree. Just the chatter alone outside of the seed depth, you think about that seed coming down a seed tube. Not everybody has speed tubes, and even then, obviously, these are important, but in a traditional seed tube, you send all that chatter to that seed tube, and you're going to have seeds essentially bouncing within that tube, and when they come out, they're going to be spaced differently.
Virtually just like we talked about with bearings on a ground drive or hydraulic system. That little bit of chatter, every little thing adds up, and that's going to affect your seed spacing.
So then we got your gauge wheels, and it looks like you guys have been doing a little bit of work on here too, and we'll talk back further on the planter. But
so I just pulled this gauge wheel off. These have another style of arm, and it's got a little wear protector here. So that's where our mustache is going to come down. Something you can add to your gauge wheel arms to make that true up. And we were talking about zeroing out a planter. These will get worn at a different rate than in their neighbor, and that's how the row units get out of sync with each other. These are something you can buy aftermarket to lengthen the lifespan of these arms, and they won't wear out near as fast. This is a brand new arm that we use here at Planter Works. Another cool thing about them is they have a bearing in there. So that's a bearing. That's going to make your arm a lot more solid, and then we shim it out against the True V, and these are going to be, you won't have any movement this way. So the old ones would wear out on those cams, and they'd move like that, and they'd get wore out, where these are a lot more true. Nice wide base there, and they're going to hold that gauge wheel up against that True V. And that being said, as we take all of our True V's off, take all of our gauge wheels off, re-shim everything, and on a John Deere planter such as this, with the gauge wheel up, we want that rubbing on the true V slightly. So it's rubbing up against that true V. We got a nice tight set up against that true V. We got a nice tight true V there. And on a case is a little bit different. Maybe not as close on a case where their gauge wheels are going.
And they're trailing.
We're trailing, and the cage is case is a little bit different on how their true V operates. But on a deer, we want that nice tight fit.
And that all kind of transfers to not only depth, but also too back to the gauge wheel, trying to keep just that really dry soil out, right? Because if you got too much of a gap, essentially as this turns, it's going to pick up dirt and funnel it into that seed trench if you have a little bit too much space, right? So then you start getting a bunch of that dry fluff in the bottom of your seed trench, and now you're inch and a quarter depth on top of dry dirt, which is never good for emergence. So even just making sure that this edge is still sharp, it's not wore, it's not rounded like on the outside here, that we're still maintaining some good closure there to keep loose dirt essentially from falling in as well, right?
100%, Kevin. Yeah, if you're digging seed and you think you're planting the moisture, but your gauge wheels aren't set right, you're getting that fluff coming from up top, falling back in that trench, and then you're planting right into dirt, into dust. You're always planting into dirt, but planting into dust, and we're not planting into moisture. And if you're ever digging seed and finding dry dirt in the bottom of that trench, and you're scratching your head why, take a look at your gauge wheels.
Yep. And then that also takes us to the back of the planter now where we're closing, right? So you got some aftermarket closing wheels on here. Obviously starting with the bushing side of it. Looks like you guys actually rebushing this planter this winter here, it looks like.
Yeah, so with this particular planter here, we put new bushings on. These are RK product bushings. Copperhead Ag provides those. What they are is a weld-on bushing that'll take all the slop out of this rear closing wheels on a John Deere planter. If you take that T-handle loose and you shake those closings, if you got any movement in there, you want to go with a setup like this. Very inexpensive way to take all the slop out, and then when you put those back in, make darn sure your closing wheels are centered on your true V's, so you're closing that true V perfectly, and one of those isn't running on top of your trench.
Yep. So like a lot of these will even probably come with some paperwork to say, hey, if you're planting 2 inches deep, how far out could they be spaced? Because you're basically drawing what imaginary line of how those are pointed and how they're spaced down to where your seed's going to be in that trench. So you're firming it in the right spot.
The deeper you're planting, the more of a gap you want in your closing wheels. So with corn, they, like Kevin said, these RKs come with paperwork, or the twisters, how to set that up according to their specs, and then you can play with that a little bit yourself, adjust to your conditions. But the deeper you plant, the wider that is. That's just a rule of thumb. So that's definitely something to check out and make sure they're centered. I've walked up to many planters where that closing wheel is shifted off to the one side, and that closing wheel is right on top of that true V. Well, we're not doing anything to this sidewall over here. We're not getting that closed just the way we want it.
That makes sense. So corn and soybeans, maybe not as big of a deal nowadays with guys planting beans maybe a little bit deeper, but if you're planting, corn at 2 1/4 and beans at only 1 inch, maybe pay attention. But if you're planting 1 3/4 and 2, it's probably not a big deal. Sorghum, if you're planting sorghum, obviously you're going to be shallower. So if you got that crop rotation, you might be changing that then between crops.
From crop to crop, you might want to take a look at that, but anymore we're planting beans a little bit deeper and about the same as corn. So you can kind of find the happy medium and stick with that.
Okay.
To go back a little bit on the row unit, we talked about true V's. Frogs is something maybe gets overlooked just a little bit, and anytime we put true V's on, we recommend put a frog on, no matter what the wear is on that frog. And a lot of people say, well, what's that frog really do? So one thing it does is take the flex out of the true V. So any flex we have in there, it's going to take it out. So if that true V's flexing throughout the soil, this is going to take it out, keep our true V true. The other thing it's going to do is protect your seed tube. So this one in particular is for a speed tube, and the very expensive speed tube on a planter, if that true V starts wearing through here, it's going to wear through your speed tube. And then on a seed tube planter, it's going to wear into that. It's going to create a little hook, I guess, on the inside of that seed tube. And then as current seeds falling down, it might hit that little hook, and it's going to mess up your seed spacing. So these little frogs, they might not seem like they do a whole lot. Anytime you're putting on True V's, make sure you're checking these out, especially in no-till conditions. Things are harder. They're going to wear out a little bit faster. Definitely want to take a look at the frogs.
And a slightly different concept, but on a Case IH planter, it would be your firming point. Does a couple little different things, but some of the similar concepts too.
Yeah, the firming point and shoes on a case, anytime you're putting new True V's on a case, go ahead and replace those. Pretty cheap insurance to make sure everything is wearing consistently, and we're keeping that trench. That trench is our friend. We want to keep that thing perfect, and those little wear parts are going to help us do that. We talked a little bit about the gauge wheel and the gauge wheel arms. So this is our depth control on a John Deere planter. Sets in there like that. Our gauge wheel arms come up and right here. This is just a part that gets overlooked. Guys they're taking their gauge wheel arms, replacing their gauge wheel arms, but this mustache here, not only this mustache, but this bolt here, we can get a lot of wear and movement inside of there. So just by replacing this mustache or checking that bolt, you can solve yourself a lot of problems. So if you're looking at new gauge wheel arms, you got wear there, make sure you don't forget to check out this mustache, check out that bolt. That'll definitely help you throughout the field and true everything up.
Yep, very overlooked part there. So outside of that, obviously we've got our components that can always be added onto a planter, your row cleaners and things like that. Pretty similar concepts. Make sure that those are within the spec. Things are turning freely and everything else. Is there anything else that you would highlight as being a real key component? You went through a lot of things individually, but is there anything else on the row units that you see as being a major key component to really dial in?
Not in particular. The scrapers, I guess, I never did talk about those. Having decent scrapers on, keep those True V's clean.
Yep.
Not a huge thing. The springs on these closing systems, make sure all those springs are how they should be. Checking if you got firmers on your planters, a new firmer is like $15. So this particular planter doesn't have firmers on it, but if you got your firmers wore out, put new firmers on. Some of these small, simple, cheap wear parts can add into a lot of bushels. We're talking less than $1,000 to do a 16-row planter. Can turn into a lot of bushels for you down the road.
Yeah, alleviate a lot of headaches. Even if a guy's looking at trading the planter the next year, you still got to look at the investment of what's going in his crop here in the next couple months. Going back to the closing, you mentioned springs. Is there a good way to check that, like a fish scale, or to figure out how much pressure should be on that?
I don't have a real good way of checking that other than I've just come up to planters where that spring's actually completely broken.
Okay.
So making sure that
yeah, at least you don't have
broken.
that, right?
So that I don't have a real super good way. As some of these newer planters, we're getting airbags on the closing system, airbags on the down pressure hydraulic on there. Checking out all those little things too, making sure your airbags are where they need to be, testing for weather and cracks, that sort of thing, just to make your life simpler down the road by solving those problems.
Okay. So I think we went through a lot of the main components to really look at. We might head over to a new planter that's a CCS and not a row planter, just to talk about some of the other things as far as tips of maybe just seed flow and things like that.
Yep.
Over there. So
now we'll go over to a new one.
All right. All right, so we got a CCS planter here, and one thing that we always talk about is just seed flowability in a planter. Obviously, we got to get seed to the row units so that we can keep them fed. And sometimes, we don't always get the seed size we want, really, Cody. So it's we're not manufacturing the seed; we're growing it. It's a living organism, and across the industry, we try our best to get the seed sizes guys want. But sometimes it comes big. And what kind of challenges can that create, and how do we alleviate that?
It's really a challenge when you're the planter guy and you're the seed guy. You got nobody to blame. So the first thing we recommend on a brand new planter, or even an any planter, CCS, like this planter, brand new, we'll come in here, we'll put some talc in that tank, talc graphite mix. We use E-Flow, 70% talc, 30% graphite is what Precisions went to. I recommend to use that in almost all your planters. Put some in the tank, we'll blow it out, all the hoses, so that whole system gets coated up with talc graphite mix before we ever put any seed in there.
Okay.
The first, if you have a newer planter or even an older planter, the first thing you plant, I wouldn't get the biggest box you got, I wouldn't get the smallest box you got. And I know it might vary on number, but try to find a decent seed size on the first box you plant, and talc graphite that box up really good, even in in the yard. If you got an extra pro box, go from box to box, kind of get it all mixed up. All that seed's got good flowability to it. After you plant that first box through a planter, a lot of times it's going to flow a lot better at that point. Everything just getting everything shined up and getting that seed flowing through there. The other thing we run into a lot of times with planters, especially our newer planters here with our tank, when PlanterWorks set up this tank, we wanted that sealed up really, really good. When we first started running these tanks, we were having seed flow troubles a little bit. Well, the reason is because we were running too much air pressure. And then we also have an agitator in there. So the amount of air pressure you run, plus that if your agitator's on or off, are two things you think about. So when we were so sealed up so well, had a good agitator in there, we found that you needed to go to a lower air pressure because we were overfeeding the system.
You're forcing it essentially. You need to kind of back that off.
So we backed that air pressure off. That helped their flowability. If you're planting 5 mile an hour and you're planting a dryland population, well, that's just not taking that much seed. And this thing's designed to plant 38,000 at 10 mile an hour, just making those adjustments that way. A lot of people want a set air pressure for every seed size, that type of thing. It varies so much. It's almost an art to set the air pressure to feed the planter properly. Different seed treatments are going to affect it. Different seed sizes are going to affect it. How much talc graphite you have, your planting population. But just taking your time, 1, using plenty of talc, 2, not always more air is a good thing. Maybe try low, try high. Some different things you can try. Making sure the system is got good talked up on it. Your seed is good and talked up. I sold some bigger seed to one of my customers last year, and one thing I bought him was an automatic talper for our seed tender. So he's running an automatic talper, everything that goes through that. I sold him really big Pioneer seed and a brand new PlanterWorks planter, and that was what we did. I did for him to plant that bigger seed, and he had good luck with that. Because all that seed had good lubricant on it. And as you go throughout the year, it's not as big a priority. But that first couple of days of planting is when we get a lot of calls on seed flowability. So if we take those extra steps, getting that system good and shined up, and that first couple of boxes good and talc, the rest of the year will be a lot smoother.
Yep, no, that's a good summary on that. Basically, yeah, go the extra mile to get it blended up more, whether that's double dumping a box or having something on the seed tender that'll mix it as it basically comes out of that system. Get the, like you said, planter pre-shined up. We know what it looks like on the outside of the planter with the true V's and everything getting shined up. Well, the inside of the tube sitting all winter, gunked up, no different. Get them shined up, and then watch your pressure essentially from there. You might have to lower it if you're having problems. And then like a high-speed planter, like you said, you're planting, maybe up to 38,000 or who knows what it is. But if we're planting 10 mile an hour and trying to shove all that seed through that planter, in some cases maybe backing it off to 7.5 or something like that might even help you out to get through a box if it's really big in that case. So it's just some tips for those one-off scenarios in case a guy runs across some pretty big seed and needs to plant it correctly.
I touched a little bit on the agitator, and I've had guys, I'll tell guys to do this and they'll scratch their head. I've had a guy last year who was having trouble. flowing beans, couldn't get beans to flow. He planted soybeans first. I said, unplug your agitator, and then everything was fine. So we were overloading those soybeans going through that planter. We unplugged the agitator on his particular planter was one of ours, but it's got the same design as a John Deere plenum setup. So if you got a PlanterWorks or a John Deere plenum setup, when you're having trouble, don't be afraid to unplug that agitator and try that out.
Okay.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense in your mind, but once you try it, we were just overloading that planter with beans, unplugged that, and they were flowing good.
Okay, well, good. No, I think those are some good tips for, again, some of those one-offs if we get some extremely large seed. Anything else you'd want to finish with, Cody?
I think the main thing to think about when we're planting is we only get one chance to plant, and the planting pass is probably the most important thing we can set up for the rest of the year. If we don't have a good, consistent stand, then we can throw all we want at it later on. And so taking your time, making the planting pass right is the best thing we can do to set the stage for the rest of the year. Yep. Scouting fields through the years, I can almost drive fields and say, these are the 4 fields we want to spend extra money on because they got a really nice stand and they come up evenly. That's the first step in high yielding corn, universally.
Yep. Well, we know the potential is over 620 bushel, and like they say, from day one, as soon as that hits the ground, we're taking bushels away. So let's try to minimize every step along the way, right? So appreciate the time, Cody. I think it's a good overview, a good reminder. We got a little bit of time now to get these planters prepped, and obviously nice weather like this kind of gets us all going a little bit. So looking forward to getting some seeds in the ground here and having things set up right to do it. So thanks.
That concludes this Pioneer Agronomy video podcast. Visit our page on pioneer.com and follow us on Twitter and Facebook for more agronomy insights.